Listen, it's the only way to make it stop. It's the only way to... Hello and welcome to another Friday the 13th edition of the Sins Review. The body count continues. If you were here last time, you would know some fucked up shit happened. It's the Fear Street curse. It's back. The first horror film series I reviewed for this show. I thought if enough people watched it, the curse would stop and I would stop being a fucking serial killer. I killed people while under that curse. So many. And eventually the curse did stop. And I reviewed the original Friday the 13th for my second episode. And that's when the zombies started coming up. Yeah, they were a nuisance, but at least they weren't the people I killed raised from the dead. Eventually I became a day-walking vampire. Then I had vampires and zombies surrounding my house. I could kill them with my bare hands. Didn't even need a weapon. I was a weapon. I am a weapon. Then they kept that Ghostface wannabe from coming here when I reviewed Scream 2022, aka Scream 5. Why didn't they just call it Scream 5? I mean, they weren't retconning any of the previous sequels like with Halloween 2018, so why the fuck? Speaking of slashers, I'm here today to review Friday the 13th Part 2. Friday the 13th Part 2 was released in 1981, just 9 months after the original. Now Sean S. Cunningham, the creator of the original Friday the 13th, who also directed the original film, had no desire on making a sequel. Neither was the special effects makeup artist Tom Savini, not even the original screenwriter. It just didn't make sense, especially with Jason being brought back as the new killer. Now, most of you have likely seen at least most of these films and can make your own opinions on that logic. Anyway, so in the original film, Mrs. Voorhees, played by the late Betsy Palmer, was the killer. In 1957, her son Jason drowned, supposedly I guessed, in Crystal Lake because 2 camp counselors weren't watching him and instead were fucking. She killed those 2 counselors and did all she could to prevent the camp from being reopened, including setting fires and killing the would-be counselors in the first film. Of course, Jason is the new killer in the franchise going forward. Okay, we can talk about that piece of shit Part 5, A New Beginning, when we get to it, but I'm doing Part 2 now. So with Cunningham out of the picture, his co-producer Steve Miner stepped into the role of director. And Adrienne King, who played Alice, who was the sole survivor of the first film, and she also killed Jason's mother, also returns. Adrienne was very much willing to return for a sequel She just didn't realize how short her role would be in part 2. Again, you might already know what happens, and I am fully aware of Adrian's stalker situation after the success of the first film, which unfortunately wasn't the kind of thing that was taken seriously back then. Wow, I almost forgot to mention the main cast of part 2. The film stars Amy Steele as Ginny, John Furley as Paul, and Warrington Gillette as Jason Voorhees. Again, this is a slasher. Characters, there's a lot of them. And a lot of them are going to be killed. So, as I recall, the film ends up taking place like 5 years after the events of the first film, and the setting is at this camp counselor training center, which is not too far away from the now blocked off section of woods that used to be Camp Crystal Lake. I suppose I should also mention that Crazy Ralph is back to warn some more would-be counselors. They're doomed. They're all doomed. Yeah. So Paul and Ginny are, I guess, partners, like co-trainers. Like, Paul is the head counselor, and Ginny is his partner slash girlfriend. Not all that surprising in these types of movies. Pretty soon we get to the whole explanation for Jason still being alive after drowning. Apparently, he didn't actually die and grow up into a man, and I'll let Paul take over for this part.
I don't want to scare anyone, but I'm going to give it to you straight about Jason. His body was never recovered from the lake after he drowned. And if you listen to the old-timers in town, they'll tell you he's still out there. Some sort of demented creature.
How many people think this is total bullshit? I mean, the logic, the fact that a lot of these things had to be explained outside of the movies, like, okay, I understand if Jason didn't actually die, but how would that explain where he was the whole time? Like, did anyone find him? Did somebody save him from drowning? Like, what? Seriously, like, and how would his mother not know? I mean, well, let's see. Say Mrs. Voorhees was so distraught that her son apparently drowned to death, and just, was beyond reasoning, and nobody really wanted to talk to her and tell her the truth and let her know, oh yeah, Jason's actually okay, or something like that, and, I guess, wow, it means she killed all those people, those counselors that were boning, killed all the would-be counselors in the first film, literally for nothing. She went crazy because nobody wanted to tell her the truth that her son was still alive. Ah, that's great. That's just fucking fantastic. And Jason's body was never recovered from the lake because he didn't actually drown. If he did, his body would eventually surface, right? Unless, the depth of Crystal Lake was 30 meters or deeper, it would be considerably more difficult to retrieve the body, especially if the water was cold. Anyway, this is not a science show, and, there's still a lot of other factors that need to be explained away, and it just gets messy and complicated. So, I know what you expect me to say here. I'll get to that. Don't worry. I first want to talk about how the characters from part 2 are different from part 1. The characters in the original Friday the 13th are more or less forgettable, but the kills are still pretty awesome. In this sequel, the characters are at least a little bit more fleshed out and sympathetic. I mean, well, most of them, except for maybe one guy. There's still some, nudity and sex, but I personally don't take offense to that. The story is meh, but is that really a deal breaker? Not really. And yes, it is now time to talk about the... As many of you know, the Friday the 13th movies were notoriously censored by the MPAA, and whole seconds of footage had to be cut out from the kill scenes in order to achieve an R rating, and therefore increase the chances for a more or less successful theatrical release. A lot of that footage was believed to have been destroyed, but I recently found out that the cut footage from at least most of the kills in Friday the 13th Part 2 were in fact recovered and restored with that film, only available on the Shout Factory Deluxe box set. You can also view the extended scenes here on YouTube. I'll leave a link into the description in case y'all are interested. It promises major orgasms. I will warn you though that the visual quality of the restored footage is not great. Overall, despite the technicalities and mostly nonsensical basis for a sequel, Friday the 13th Part 2 is actually damn good. It's still pretty scary and entertaining. I can understand why some fans don't really care for the Friday the 13th sequels, and yeah, like I said, there's the technicalities and such for Jason turning out to be alive and grown up and the new killer for the franchise, but even still, he became a huge 80s horror icon, and fans still enjoy watching all of these movies to this day. I consider myself to be one of those fans, even though I didn't grow up in the 80s. Horror is a very subjective genre, and slashers especially have a subjective nature due to the subject matter of mass murder and most commonly bloody violence. Pretty much what it comes down to is you're either a fan or you're not, and either way is no one else's business. I give Friday the 13th Part 2 full sins. This has been the Sins Review. I'm Jackie Sins.
You a dead meat slime bag! Yo man, it's cool, man, it's cool.